Chloe, the ice-cold school beauty, stole bread from the supermarket. I caught her on my phone and grabbed her hand before she could run. In my last life, I let her go and she died in a car crash. I would keep her tonight to ensure she survived this time. I pulled her into a corner and played the video with a wicked grin. Chloe trembled as I threatened to show the school her secret. I held out my hand and demanded she return everything she stole. Since my father owned this store, she had no way to escape. She pulled 3 cheap loaves of bread from her backpack with tearful eyes. I dumped the rest of her belongings onto the table to check for more. Her bag held only old textbooks, a torn pencil case, and 1 sanitary pad. Chloe turned pale and quickly snatched her broken backpack away. I pretended not to notice her distress and moved even closer. I ordered her to take off her jacket to prove she wasn't hiding anything. She hesitated, then slowly lowered the zipper to reveal her worn t-shirt. Her eyes were red with humiliation as she stood there trembling. I realized then that Chloe didn't look at me with disgust or hatred. She seemed embarrassed and upset, suggesting she might have actually liked me. In my past life, I was too obsessed with another girl to notice her. I felt like an idiot for being so clueless back then. I stepped back and asked if she had anything hidden in her shorts. Chloe turned out her pockets, but I ignored them and checked the clock. The car hadn't reached the intersection, so I kept giving her a hard time. I crouched and reached toward her, causing her to panic and breathe heavily. I told her to jump twice to see if anything fell out of her clothes. She chose to obey because she felt she couldn't argue after being caught. Chloe jumped twice while I watched, then I told her to stop. Chloe insisted she only took 3 loaves and asked to finally leave. As she reached the door, I asked if she was really that hungry. She lowered her head and stayed silent, clutching her backpack to her chest. I opened a loaf of bread and offered it, telling her to eat. She looked so thin that a light breeze could have knocked her over. I firmly shoved the bread into her hand since I couldn't sell it. She took a small bite before she began eating faster and faster. Suddenly, 2 tears fell like loose pearls and hit the floor. She hadn't cried during the search, but the food made her break down. I watched her silently and opened a second loaf for her. I felt guilty for not having any tissues to offer in that moment. It was shocking that a top student was driven to steal for food. After finishing the second loaf, she grabbed the third one and started eating. She took out a pen and paper to write a note while eating. The note said that Chloe Bennett owed Ethan Hayes 3 loaves. Chloe's eyes immediately settled on a pink backpack. I put it in her hands and told her it was hers. She tried to put it back because her old one was damaged. I told her to take the bag if she wanted me to stay quiet. She paused and added the backpack to her growing IU list. I led her to the school's supply aisle to continue the list. Chloe accidentally bumped into my back and rubbed her forehead in pain. I told her to watch where she was going while smiling. I placed a pink pencil case into her arms despite her protests. She claimed she didn't have enough money to repay me for today. I told her she could repay me in another way instead. Chloe tilted her head, her thoughts clearly wandering to something else. Her ears turned bright red as she quickly looked away from me. I kept leading her through the store until we reached another aisle. She blushed and tried to leave, but I told her to stop. I teased her about being a bad kid who would do anything. Chloe turned back and insisted that she did not need any pads. I told her my expert calculation showed she was running low. She caught the pack and marveled at the scent of the product. She had only ever used unscented loose ones before today. I told her to get home safely and come to school tomorrow. If she did that, I promised today's incident would never happen. Chloe nodded and handed me the IOU with both of her hands. I opened the door for her, but 3 stylish girls were outside. Madison had arrived with her friends exactly like. Madison and her friends piled a mountain of snacks on the counter. I started scanning each item while Madison grabbed her usual drinks. Madison froze and asked why I was actually scanning the prices. The girls behind her whispered about the snacks being free. Madison grew embarrassed and called me cheap for charging her. I laughed and reminded her that she offered to pay. Madison slammed the counter, claiming she was getting truly angry. She asked if I saw her with Logan at the mall. I lied about sleeping all day and insisted she pay for everything. Madison's friends wanted to leave, but she played her trump card. She revealed that Logan asked her out the previous afternoon. I bluntly exposed her plan to keep him waiting until graduation. Madison lost her temper and asked what I meant by that. I told her to buy the items or put them back. She threatened to accept Logan's confession tomorrow to make me jealous. I simply applauded and sang a song for the new couple. Chloe nearly laughed, but quickly turned away in visible panic. Madison pulled her friends toward the door, promising I would regret this. I slammed the counter and told them to put everything back. Her friends quickly returned the snacks and led the trembling Madison away. Chloe hugged her backpack and prepared to leave the shop. I picked up a hair clip and gently pinned back her hair. She froze in shock before quickly removing the clip from her head. I told her it was a gift for voting for me. She shoved the clip back into my hand and fled. I warned her to walk slowly or I would report her tomorrow. Chloe became my desk mate, but Miss Carter warned me not to distract her. I poked Chloe's arm to test the rules, making her ears turn bright red. I dodged the teacher's swinging pointer and swaggered toward the back of the room. Chloe followed with her head down, embarrassed by the sudden attention from the class. At our desks, I leaned over to admire Chloe's gorgeous eyes while she studied. She grew anxious and whispered for me to return to my own seat. The more flustered she became, the more I enjoyed watching her cute reactions. Miss Carter slammed the podium, forcing me to look away for only a brief moment. I teased Chloe about her tiny mouth until she pressed her lips together tightly. I pulled warm meat buns from my bag and insisted that she eat them. Though she tried to refuse, my firm gaze made her take the bag obediently. She gave me an angry glare, but I simply smiled at her compliance. Miss Carter left as our English teacher, Grace Monroe, walked into the classroom. Grace was a pretty recent graduate who was eager to connect with her students. I opened my textbook and fought the urge to doodle on the first page. I was determined to study hard and overcome my old, lazy muscle memory. Chloe often watched me from a distance, confused by my strange and impulsive movements. I frequently mimed jump shots or threw trash into bins like a professional athlete. If I missed a shot, I would obsessively repeat the motion until I succeeded. She found my behavior weird, yet she couldn't help but watch me intently. During the lesson, Grace asked me to read the first paragraph of the text aloud. I stood up and began reading with a natural, perfect accent that surprised everyone. Grace looked up from her book in shock as the entire class turned around. Chloe stared at me, completely stunned by my unexpected and fluent display. Grace leaned against a desk, listening intently to my flawless British accent. Dylan's eyes lit up as he asked what I did all summer. I told them I studied hard because I am definitely going to college. Surprise and delight flashed in Chloe's eyes at my sudden academic ambition. Grace expressed high hopes for me and told me to take a seat. Before my rebirth, I spoke English daily while expanding my business overseas. I tried to slap my own thigh, but accidentally hit Chloe's leg instead. Chloe jerked back and punched my arm with her eyes blazing in anger. I offered to coach her English if she tutored me in everything else. After a long silence, she passed me a note agreeing to the deal. During the break, I reminded Chloe to eat the buns I brought. She claimed she wasn't hungry, but I firmly told her not to argue. Her eyes lit up with joy as she tasted the delicious meat filling. She finished the first bun quickly and looked up at me with red ears. I felt a sense of satisfaction, almost like I was raising a daughter. I forced her to eat the third bun despite her quiet, resentful protests. I decided to be firm with her since I still held her shoplifting secret. Madison walked over and asked me to step outside for a private talk. I stayed in my seat and told her to say whatever she wanted. She whispered that her interest in Logan was just a joke to scare me. Madison blushed and reminded me that we were still too young to date. Chloe suddenly warned us that the teacher was coming back to the room. At noon, I flatly refused Madison's invitation to eat lunch together. I watched Chloe stay behind to study while everyone else went to eat. I put my head down and pretended to fall into a deep sleep. Chloe looked over and saw me snoring with drool running down my face. Chloe folded a small tissue and carefully wiped the corner of Ethan's mouth. She had known him since middle school, but he had forgotten her completely. She knew he never cared, but she remembered every moment they shared. Chloe gently touched his cheek with a pale finger while he slept soundly. She pulled her hand back quickly, her heart racing in the quiet room. Once his snoring resumed, she grabbed her backpack and left for lunch. The cafeteria was empty and the cleaners had already started their work. Martha sighed, telling Chloe she was far too late for the hot food. Donna reminded Martha that Chloe was the top student who studied late. Martha softened and offered her extra rice and meat gravy for 50 cents. She tried to study on an empty stomach, but it never worked well. Chloe saw only $5 remaining on her meal card after paying. She sat alone in the corner, eating every single grain of rice slowly. Ethan jolted awake to find Chloe gone and the lunch hour nearly over. He hurried to the cafeteria and asked Martha about the girl before him. Martha explained that Chloe always came late and only ate plain rice. Ethan realized her studying was just a cover to hide her financial struggles. He understood her pride and why she chose to eat alone every day. During the first period, Miss Carter announced the upcoming fall sports day. The boys shouted for prep school uniforms, making the girls turn pink. Chloe remained perfectly calm and kept her eyes fixed on her school textbook. Ethan imagined her in a uniform, wishing she could enjoy being young. He had plenty of money but knew she would never accept his charity. Miss Carter finalized the choice, agreeing to the prep school uniform style. Everyone had 1 week to give Logan $50 and their clothing size. Chloe looked up in surprise at the price before returning to her book. During PE, I informed her that she would be tutoring me this Saturday. She tensed up, insisting that someone else must be home during the session. I gave her a wicked grin, eventually forcing her to choose my bedroom. She hugged her pink backpack and gave me a doubtful, adorable little nod. I felt like I had successfully lured her into my personal space. We headed downstairs to line up, but Chloe deliberately lagged behind me. I slung my blue backpack over my shoulder and sauntered toward the field. The contrast of our blue and pink backpacks caught the attention of several girls. Our teacher, Marcus Reed, announced that today's class would be a free period. The class erupted in cheers, but some students simply wandered to the steps. Chloe sat down and carefully placed her backpack on top of her textbook. She tried to study, but her eyes kept drifting toward the basketball court. I drove past Logan and threw down a powerful dunk that rattled the rim. The entire court went silent as I landed smoothly and rolled my neck. Logan stared in shock, realizing I could now dunk like a pro athlete. My strength and vertical had improved significantly since my rebirth the day before. I wondered why my IQ hadn't increased along with my new physical power. Madison complimented me with a blush, but I only cared about Chloe's reaction. Chloe hugged her book and pretended to read, though her red ears gave her away. She sat in that same spot with a textbook during every single free period. Madison and her friends gazed at me dreamily after my latest successful dunk. She praised my performance, but I simply ignored her and looked away. Logan glared at me with clear jealousy and challenged me to a one-on-one match. I tossed him the ball but suddenly went pale when I looked toward the steps. Ignoring the game, I sprinted toward the crowd gathering near the school stairs. I pushed through the crowd to find Chloe clutching her injured ankle in pain. Someone mentioned a girl pushed her down the steps before running away quickly. I cursed loudly, wishing I could catch whoever was responsible for hurting her. I crouched beside Chloe and told the others I was taking her to the nurse. She hesitated to climb onto my back until I looked at her with growing impatience. Chloe finally leaned against me, causing my angry expression to soften into something gentler. Chloe wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, her face flushed with deep embarrassment. I stood up and carried her toward the steps to retrieve our heavy backpacks. She insisted on holding both bags despite my worry that her arms would get tired. As we headed to the nurse, a warm smile spread across her hidden face. I asked if she knew who pushed her, but she remained quiet to protect them. The nurse's office was empty, so I carefully set Chloe down on an exam bed. I pulled up a stool and prepared to examine her injury myself. Chloe watched me with red ears, wondering if I actually knew what I was doing. I explained that I used to set bones back in my village. Chloe punched my shoulder in embarrassment as I grabbed her right foot. I slipped off her shoe, revealing a clean white sock. Chloe bit her lip shyly while keeping her legs tightly together. I joked about her feet not smelling, which made her curse me out. I slapped her calf to keep her still and removed her sock. Her ankle was slightly swollen, so I gently massaged the area. I diagnosed it as a mild sprain and found some medicated oil. Chloe tried to take the bottle, but I barked at her to stay still. She asked why I removed her entire sock for a simple ankle treatment. I realized I was staring at her bare foot and felt quite awkward. Chloe snatched her sock back and glared at me with total disgust. She applied the oil herself and quickly left the nurse's office. I chased after her, claiming my hands sometimes had a mind of their own. Chloe ignored me and headed back toward the classroom to study. I went to get my bike but couldn't stop worrying about her injury. I didn't want her limping all the way home on that sprained ankle. I sighed and decided to head back to offer a ride. When I reached the classroom, I saw Chloe standing at the podium. She wasn't studying, but was instead cleaning the chalkboard for me. The history teacher was very tall and had written high on the board. Chloe struggled to reach the top, her sleeve slipping down her arm. I noticed my own name, Ethan Hayes, was listed on the duty roster. Chloe took a deep breath and jumped on her injured foot to reach. As Chloe reached for the board, a large hand took the eraser from her view. She turned quickly, but her injured ankle gave out and she tipped sideways. I quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her back before she could fall down. Chloe backed away nervously, asking why I had not gone home for the day. I reached the top of the board easily and finished cleaning all the chalk. I asked her if she had always been doing my cleaning duties for me. She looked away guiltily and claimed she was just going back to her studies. I grabbed her arm again, insisting that she go home to rest her ankle. Chloe refused my help, so I told her she must leave the school by sunset. She bit her lip resentfully and decided to head home right at that moment. As she packed her bag, she carefully wiped the chalk dust off the podium. She had finished my entire job despite claiming she was not helping me at all. I followed her to the school gate while walking my bike slowly beside her. I offered her a ride, but she looked conflicted and gripped her sleeve tightly. She whispered that her father would chase any strange boys away with a stick. The phrase "Icy's stubborn" and Softy suddenly had a clear face in my mind. Chloe gave me a rare, soft smile and said goodbye before walking away slowly. I stood there with a warm smile and watched her walk for a long moment. As I rode off, she turned back to watch me vanish into the crowd. Mom clapped happily, but Frank scoffed and spat a sunflower seed onto the floor. Dad looked like a young Will Ferrell while he mocked my big dreams. Frank told Natalie that kids at the bottom always dream the biggest. Natalie smacked his shoulder and told him to encourage his son instead. I mentioned that I moved up to second to last in my finals. Frank stared in shock because I had been dead last for 2 years. I neglected to mention that I only moved up because someone missed the exam. Frank tossed his seeds aside and complained that each generation was getting worse. I realized my poor grades might be hereditary as Frank prepared for work. He mentioned the market was short-staffed because their employee, Carol, had recently quit. I suggested a classmate could replace her and work for lower pay after school. Frank liked the idea of sabotaging a potential rival for the college exams. I gave him a thumbs up and praised his bizarre sense of logic. He told me to bring the girl in for an interview tomorrow morning. After Dad left, I asked Mom where my younger sister Lily was hiding. Mom explained that Lily was getting too close to a man outside her school. Lily burst out of her room to defend the man she called Mr. Overalls. She pouted in her pink bear pajamas before slamming her bedroom door shut. I remembered the man from my own days at Eastbrook Middle School. He was a simple-minded but handsome man who always wore clean blue overalls. Most students called him an idiot, but he was actually quite charming and neat. Other kids used to bully him by throwing rocks and chanting mean insults. I would often step in, but one girl defended him even more fiercely. She once chased the bullies away with a broom like a brave superhero. I never knew her name, only that she had long, messy hair. Mr. Overalls always smiled at Lily as if she were his own daughter. A girl used to protect him in middle school, and Lily had taken her place. I told Mom she should hear the full story before deciding to punish Lily. Lily's room was a pink ocean filled with stuffed animals and girly furniture. She sat on her bed hugging a teddy bear while looking deeply annoyed. I leaned against the door and shared a secret about my middle school days. I told her that I used to protect Mr. Overalls from bullies back then. Lily looked surprised to hear that her brother had such a kind side. She nodded and agreed that the old man was actually very sweet. I warned her to call me immediately if anything ever got out of hand. Lily smiled and swung her feet, finally finding her brother less annoying. I returned to my room and pulled a dusty box of textbooks from storage. I cleaned the books and stacked them neatly on my desk to begin. I decided to go all in on my studies to see if I was smart. Studying made me sleepy, so I used a rope to keep my head up. Lily entered with fruit and screamed when she saw me tied to the ceiling. Ridgeway High was a strict school compared to the elite Fairview Academy. The next morning, I arrived at school early with dark circles under my eyes. A red rope mark was still visible around my neck from the night before. I saw a teacher stop Madison for wearing a short skirt and no uniform. She lowered. I ignored Madison and walked my bike through the gate. She rubbed her eyes in disbelief seeing me arrive so early. The bell rang for first period biology class. Ryan immediately dropped his head onto the desk and started snoring loudly. I stuffed the buns I bought into Chloe's desk. I told her to eat them after class without any arguing. Chloe stared at my neck with a look of deep concern. I lied and said I tied my neck up to stay awake. I gave her a small smile and closed my eyes to rest. Class was useless without the basics, so I reviewed material in my head. While I slept, Chloe secretly hid 2 buns in her lunch container. I noticed her actions but decided not to expose her. I raised my head about 10 minutes later to check on her. Chloe turned and solemnly confessed that she had already eaten 2 buns. Her ears turned bright red as she awkwardly looked away. I realized for the first time that she looked adorable while lying. The biology teacher explained how pulse rates work in lie detectors. He instructed us to pair up and check each other's heart rate. Chloe nervously hid her hands behind her back. Suddenly, she became proactive and offered to test my pulse first. I rolled up my sleeve and placed my arm on the desk. Chloe placed her pale fingertips gently against my wrist. A girl named Zoe suddenly shouted that Ryan's pulse indicated he was pregnant. The class laughed while Ryan continued to sleep and drool. The teacher told everyone to stop fooling around and start asking questions. I grinned wickedly and asked Chloe if she had a secret crush. Her ears turned red as she awkwardly looked away from me. She claimed it was a stupid question, but her embarrassment gave her away. I tried to listen for her heartbeat before the teacher ended the lesson. Morning classes ended and Madison approached my desk in her short skirt. She asked if I would eat lunch with her today. I told her I was busy studying and opened an old textbook. Madison stomped her foot in frustration at my sudden academic interest. I slapped the desk and told Madison to leave before I threw her out. Her friend pulled her away as she nearly burst into tears. Once the room cleared, only Chloe and I remained in the quiet classroom. Chloe watched me study with different colored pens and smiled to herself. We eventually headed to the cafeteria once the lunch rush had ended. The lunch lady charged Chloe 50 cents while charging me $2. I sat across from Chloe and pulled several snacks from my backpack. I claimed I had no appetite and swapped my full tray for hers. Chloe looked up in shock as I began eating her plain rice. I told her that her simple meal tasted much better than mine. She whispered a quiet thank you and continued eating with a small smile. I informed Chloe that my market needed a new night cashier immediately. I told her she was hired but would only make half the standard rate. I warned her not to refuse, and she nodded like a loyal employee. She accepted the job offer without a single word of complaint. Chloe ate a single egg and half the rice before stopping her meal. She began packing the remaining drumstick and sausage into her small container. I watched in disbelief as she explained she was taking it to her father. I asked if she was really leaving campus just to bring him food. Chloe noticed my disapproval and quietly set her plastic fork aside. She sat there stiffly, waiting for me to give her another order. I felt a nameless rage toward her father for making her scavenge. If she were my daughter, I would spoil her rotten instead of letting her suffer. I slammed the table in frustration, making both of the lunch trays jump. Chloe looked up at me timidly as 2 tears spilled down her cheeks. She whispered a quiet apology and began unpacking the food to return it. She claimed she was full and forced a smile that was incredibly sad. I pushed the tray back and told her to take the food to him. I realized I could never win against such a devoted and loyal daughter. Chloe carefully packed the meal into her backpack and bowed in gratitude. I watched her leave the cafeteria while sighing deeply at the entire situation. Chloe turned left after leaving the high school and quickened her pace. She headed toward the gates of Eastbrook Middle School instead of going home. Across the street, she spotted a middle-aged man wearing blue overalls. He sat perfectly straight while staring at the gate like an attentive child. A rare smile appeared on Chloe's face as she hurried toward him. The man kept head down, apologizing repeatedly in a soft, childlike voice. He nervously twisted his fingers like a young boy while Chloe gently comforted him. Chloe explained that she simply ran too fast for him to catch her. The handsome man repeated her words slowly as if learning how to speak again. She wiped the dirt from his face with a tissue and scolded him softly. The man looked hurt until Chloe offered him a chicken drumstick wrapped in tissue. He excitedly urged Chloe to eat first, because he feared bad people were coming. Chloe played along and fed him rice while he swung his legs happily. At the school gates, a girl named Lily watched them from a short distance. She smiled seeing Chloe feed the man before skipping back into the school. Lily was happy to see that someone had beaten her to feeding Mr. Overalls. Chloe returned to the classroom and greeted the narrator with a rare, kind smile. The narrator stared in shock because the icy girl had never been so polite. Embarrassed by the sudden attention, Chloe sat down and took out her school books. The narrator asked if her father enjoyed the special meal she had brought him. Chloe nodded happily, her faint smile revealing the true source of her good mood. The narrator reminded her about the job interview at the market after school. He told her not to worry because his father was very easygoing and relaxed. Chloe asked why he spoke so poorly of his own father's intelligence. The narrator joked that both their fathers were likely missing a few screws. Suddenly, Chloe slammed her fist into his chest with surprising and painful force. She glared at him with tearful eyes, clearly wounded by his insensitive comment. Chloe apologized, and an awkward silence filled the space between us. I took a deep breath and apologized for my harsh words about her father. Chloe turned away, unable to hide the tears streaming down her face. Years of hidden pain and suffocating shadows finally poured out of her. She had always tried to be strong, but brave facade finally collapsed. I admitted that I didn't truly understand her complicated family situation. If her father cut me off, there must be a specific reason. Chloe stayed silent, defending her father with a fierce and quiet loyalty. She remained cold and distant throughout all 4 of our afternoon classes. During evening study, something happened that shocked the entire student body. The classroom suddenly plunged into total darkness as the power failed completely. Students gasped and looked outside to find the entire campus pitch black. The room erupted into chaos as the class clowns began to celebrate. Grace Monroe tried to restore order, but the students refused to listen. While others hoped for romantic moments, I dropped to my knees in terror. I never expected to be the one paralyzed by a fear of the dark. When I was 6, I spent a terrifying night trapped in a well. Since that incident, I have always needed the lights on to sleep. My chest tightened as panic began to take hold of my body. Suddenly, I heard a heavenly voice calling my name from the darkness. Chloe, the icy girl who had ignored me, was now calling out anxiously. Outside in the hall, Victor's flashlight swept through the corridors to find hiding students. His angry shouts rang out as he tried to force everyone back to class. Grace stood at the podium and sighed at the yelling outside. A shadow darted past her and touched her calf. She jumped up and ran toward the office in a panic. Her heels clacked rapidly as she abandoned the messy situation. Inside the dark room, I knelt on the floor, struggling to breathe. A powerful stench of feet filled the air around me. The Biohazard brothers had likely taken off their shoes. Darkness and panic hit me all at once. My childhood fear of the dark still haunted me as an adult. Chloe called out to me anxiously in the pitch-black room. A familiar fragrance drifted toward me as she crouched by my side. She instantly diagnosed my condition and helped me stand up. Her warm, soft hand slipped into mine with expert care. She spoke gently, leading me away like a soothing guardian. I followed her obediently, feeling less afraid because of her touch. If someone had held my hand inside that well, I would have been fine. Chloe led me out of the building toward the open field. A bright full moon scattered silver light across the grass. The glowing moon made me feel much better almost immediately. I lay on the grass, drenched in a cold sweat from the ordeal. Chloe sat quietly beside me, hugging her legs for comfort. She pointed at the moon and smiled to help me calm down. She tried to distract me with technical facts about the moonlight. Then she explained that her father suffered from the same fear. I realized she was used to comforting her father during his episodes. My hostility toward her father faded as I recognized our shared pain. I rested my arms behind my head and looked at her. "Hey, Miss School Beauty, are you still mad at me?" Chloe remained silent, curled up like a tiny ball on the grass. I asked her to say something, but she didn't respond. Chloe still said nothing, so I decided to try a new tactic. I curled up like a shrimp and began to groan. Chloe went pale and rushed over to grab my trembling shoulders. She saw me drenched in sweat and tried to sit me up. I grabbed her arm with a quivering hand and whispered that I was scared. Chloe panicked and quickly pulled my upper body into her lap. She used all her strength to turn my head toward the moon. I did not care about the moon while resting against her. Her sweet scent drifted over me as I pretended to tremble. Chloe looked around anxiously and asked if I was still scared. I grabbed her arm and asked if she was still mad. She admitted she was only mad for a second before I sat up. I grinned and did a goofy shoulder shimmy to show I was fine. Chloe's face turned icy and she furiously shoved my chest. As I fell, I instinctively grabbed her arm and pulled her down. She landed on my chest and our eyes met from inches away. The floodlights suddenly flashed on and exposed the entire green field. We realized hundreds of other couples were also hiding on the track. 6 stern deans walked onto the field and turned off their flashlights. Victor shouted for everyone to stay still and state their names. The entire field erupted as students began to scatter in every direction. I wrapped an arm around Chloe's waist and pushed myself up. I grabbed her hand and ran with the crowd to protect her. Getting caught would be a disaster for a top student like her. I knew the Deans would never believe my excuse about the dark. Victor shrieked for us to stop while limping at a snail's pace. He clutched his backside and complained loudly about his painful hemorrhoids. Chloe panted hard as she followed me through the fleeing crowd. Chloe's ears burned red as she replayed the brief moment in her head. I flashed her a bright smile before we escaped into the senior hallway. Several couples were caught, making me feel glad that we had successfully evaded capture. Chloe stopped and told me to wait 3 minutes before entering the classroom. She hurried inside with her head lowered while I went to the restroom first. Grace stood at the podium looking furious about the chaos during the power outage. Miss Carter glared at the class from the doorway like a hungry beast. Grace scanned the room for the person who had dared to grope her. She spotted Dylan, but his righteous expression made him seem far too innocent. Miss Carter slammed the podium and ordered Tyler to bring his parents tomorrow. Ryan sat wide awake, intensely studying everyone within 15 feet of his desk. Someone had kissed Ryan in the dark, and he was determined to find them. He questioned Zoe about her red face, but she quickly brushed him off. Miss Carter scolded several more students while Chloe and I remained safely undetected. We were both secretly thrilled to have escaped any trouble during the blackout. Evening study ended early, so Chloe followed me toward the school bike garage. I told her to imagine the interviewer's head as a giant potato to stay calm. I patted my bike seat and offered Chloe a ride home after we exited. She looked at the crowd and stubbornly shook her head while gripping her straps. I realized she was worried about rumors if anyone saw us together at school. I slowed my pace to leave a wide gap between us for her comfort. We walked 50 feet apart until the other students finally disappeared from sight. I rode up beside Chloe and told her to get on the bike. She sat side saddle on the back seat while I warned her to hold on. Chloe tentatively pinched my jacket with 2 fingers as I began to pedal away. She lost her balance and quickly wrapped both arms tightly around my waist. Chloe kept her head down with red ears, hiding a rare, happy smile. She never imagined the boy she admired from afar would ever give her a ride. I hummed a song while pedaling toward my family's large grocery market. Chloe asked about the tune, but I realized the song wouldn't exist until 2014. In this year of 2010, I had almost forgotten that I was actually reborn. My first goal was getting into a good college to enjoy my second youth. Most reborn heroes rushed into business, but I wanted to prioritize my education first. I hoped to attend the same elite university as Chloe after our high school graduation. Though she was bound for Harvard or Yale, I refused to stay in last place. I suddenly hit the brakes at a red light, causing Chloe to bump into me. I boldly declared that I would study hard and get into a great college. Pedestrians stared at us while Chloe lowered her head in deep, red-faced embarrassment. She promised to tutor me as the light turned green and we moved again. We finally arrived at Harvest Fresh Market, the largest grocery store on Maple. When Frank turned, his feral expression nearly made me laugh. I told him I brought someone and asked him to teach her the basics. We stepped outside where Chloe waited, her long lashes trembling with nerves. Frank's smile froze the moment he saw her, and he managed a stiff greeting. He suddenly grabbed my arm and dragged me back inside the store. Frank demanded to know where I had kidnapped such a beautiful girl. I explained she was my deskmate, but he flicked my forehead in disbelief. He accused me of tricking her and reached for his shoe to hit me. I dodged his strike and insisted that she had volunteered for the job. Frank kicked me toward the door, telling me to send her home immediately. I stumbled outside awkwardly and found Chloe with her head lowered. She forced a smile and said she should go home before her dad worried. I rushed over and grabbed her arm as she turned toward the darkness. She tried to hide her red, teary eyes behind her long hair. Chloe was sensitive and likely blamed herself for the loud argument she heard. I told her to wait and promised I would handle the situation quickly. I kicked the store door open and faced Frank with a serious proposal. If he let her work, I promised to rank in the top 40. Frank narrowed his eyes and countered with a demand for the top 30. We haggled until we finally settled on me reaching the top 35. He warned me that if I failed, the girl would have to leave. Reaching the top 35 meant climbing 500 spots in 1 month. As I went to get Chloe, Frank asked if I liked her. He claimed a girl like that would never give me a second glance. I scoffed at his words, knowing my protective feelings for her were pure. I found Chloe standing alone in a dark corner away from the lights. Her slender figure looked so fragile that the wind might sweep her away. I teased Chloe for hiding, but then I noticed her tear-stained face. I led her inside to meet Frank so he could show her around. Frank glanced at her pink backpack and seemed to realize her situation. Chloe followed him obediently while clutching a notebook and a pen. Frank told her the work was simple and she didn't need notes. I followed behind them, watching her like a proud father and smiling. He explained her duties included straightening shelves and ringing up customers. Frank pointed at some trash and told me to clean it up later. Frank left for the night after telling me to teach Chloe the register. I began writing down instructions for her to study while I worked. Frank suddenly returned for his bag and froze while staring down an aisle. I hurried over, fearing something had happened to Chloe while we were busy. We found Chloe kneeling on the floor, carefully scrubbing with a small rag. She worked with solemn focus, silently performing what she believed was her duty. Frank was visibly moved by her dedication and asked who she was. I told him she was a good kid while feeling a mix of emotions. Frank reminded me she could only stay if I made the top 35. I resolved to study hard for the college entrance exam to prove him wrong. I had to make up for years of missed education in just 1 year. Unlike my past life, I knew exactly what I wanted to achieve now. I walked over to Chloe while she was still scrubbing the floor. She stood up. Chloe instinctively shrank back and shut her eyes in embarrassment. She dropped the filthy rag onto the floor and lowered her head. I pointed toward the supply closet and told her to wash her hands. Chloe finished washing up and met me at the register as instructed. I pulled 5 bills from the drawer and told her to hold out her hand. I explained that the market pays all employees in advance every month. Chloe stared into my eyes, looking like she saw through my lie. She refused the advance and asked to be paid with everyone else. I threatened to tell my father what she did if she defied me. Chloe panicked and immediately clutched the $500 to her chest. I smiled and told her she would earn at least that much monthly. I suggested a raise could be arranged if she pleased the boss. Chloe's ears turned bright red as she clutched the money even tighter. I rubbed her head and explained she should simply try to smile more. Chloe looked up earnestly and promised she would tutor me as agreed. I reminded her to come to my house this Saturday for our session. Chloe offered me $100 with both hands to pay her debt. I took the money, but noticed she still looked hesitant and embarrassed. She whispered softly that I owed her $13.50. I burst out laughing and handed her the correct change. I asked what she planned to do with the rest of her fortune. Chloe mentioned her meal card and practice tests, but became unsure. I suggested she buy the class uniform for the upcoming sports day. She initially refused, but I told her she might regret missing out. Chloe looked away and thought quietly about my words. Chloe's fingers tightened on the bills, but she couldn't bear to crease them. My heart ached because she weighed $50 like a matter of life or death. I suggested she buy the uniform now and sell it back later for a discount. To ease the tension, I joked about wanting the original scent of the fabric. At home, my parents were waiting with strange looks in the living room. Frank warned he would keep his word if I failed to reach the top 35. Natalie asked if the girl Frank mentioned was really as beautiful as an angel. Frank wondered why a girl with such poise was struggling so much for money. Later that evening, my sister Lily waved me into her room with a sweet look. She hugged my arm and asked me to attend her parent-teacher conference tomorrow. Lily admitted she lied about her grades and feared our mother would be angry. I agreed to help her, but warned this would be the very last time. The next morning, Chloe paid for her uniform to join the sports day parade. Madison watched in surprise as the class prepared for the big upcoming event. Chloe whispered that she wouldn't sell the uniform back, her ears turning red. I chuckled at her shy reaction and continued reading my book during break. During second period, I skipped class and strolled toward my old middle school. I saw a familiar figure sitting perfectly straight by the landscaping near the entrance. I bought 2 lollipops and sat beside him, offering one as a friendly gesture. He recognized me immediately and called me by my old nickname, Little Monk. An elderly. Walter explained that someone set Daniel up, causing his company to fail. His family fell into poverty, and his wife soon died from untreated leukemia. Years later, his son was hit by a car and died that same night. After losing his wife and son, Daniel's mind finally broke under the pain. Walter sighed, noting that Daniel's young daughter suffered the most of all. She grew up in poverty while caring for her mentally broken father. Despite her own hardships, she remained a remarkable and devoted child. Walter left, and I bought a large bag of bread for Daniel. I placed the food in his arms before heading toward the school gate. Lily stood outside the gate and waved at me as I passed by. I returned to Ridgeway High and saw Chloe coming out of the office. We spoke at the same time, causing her to lower her head shyly. I mentioned my sister's conference, but Chloe claimed nothing was wrong. During evening study, I focused on my textbooks while others did homework. I needed to surpass 18 students to reach the top of the class. While I felt confident, English, math, and physics remained a challenge. My eyes settled on Ryan, who was sound asleep at his desk. In my past life, he eventually became a legend by scoring very high. A woman named Grace would eventually inspire him to change his entire life. I left for the restroom, but Chloe had vanished by the time I returned. She had grabbed her backpack and left the classroom. Frank sat by the register, trimming his nose hair in a makeup mirror. He looked up and told me that Chloe had arrived ages ago. He praised her diligence and said she was much better than me. I turned and saw Chloe wearing a small red market uniform vest. Strands of hair clung to her pale face as she carried a broom. Despite the ugly uniform, she looked incredibly cute in the dim light. Chloe paused and awkwardly asked Frank if she should throw out the empty bottles. Frank told her to toss them, but Chloe insisted they were worth money. I slapped the counter and told her to save every single one. Frank stood stunned after being lectured by his son about wasting money. I reminded him that Chloe only makes $500 a month here. Frank claimed she volunteered to clean the entire market by herself. I grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her into a corner to talk. I asked why she snuck off from evening study to work extra. Chloe had no answer and nervously gripped an empty bottle in her hands. I told her that working more hours would not result in a raise. Chloe looked up and stubbornly insisted that $500 was too much. She believed her labor should finally match the pay she received. I raised my hands in frustration, unable to win against her logic. Chloe threatened to tell my dad if I continued to bully her. I sighed and told her not to let work hurt her studies. 1 year later, I ranked 7th while Chloe ranked 3rd in the state. After checking our scores, I biked her home through the quiet streets. Chloe tightened her arms around my waist and pressed against my back. She whispered that she could never repay me in this lifetime. She asked if we would still see each other in college. I froze for a moment and then grinned like a complete idiot. A gentle night breeze swept down the avenue as our backpacks swayed. It felt as though we had